Well, today, President Donald Trump marked the first day of Black History Month as only he could, using the occasion to lash out at the media. Let's talk about it now. Senior political commentator Symone is here. Paris Denard, who worked in George W. Bush White House and who attended the event today, he's here as well. Michael Eric Dyson, the author of Tears, We Cannot Stop a Sermon to White America. So interesting conversation I'm sure we're going to have here today. The president held a photo op with black staff and supporters to commemorate Black History Month. And instead of first acknowledging the importance of the moment, he began by sharing his thoughts on how many black votes he had to get in the next election, and then, true to form, he turned his criticism to the media.
Last month we celebrated the life of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whose incredible example is unique in American history. You read all about Dr. Martin Luther King a week ago when somebody said I took the statue out of my office, and it turned out that that was fake news. From this point, fake news.
So Symone, some people have compared this to the CIA speech, standing in front of a wall honoring fallen heroes. There's a time and place for everything. Was this the right time and place for that?
No, Donald Trump is aloof. He has no decorum. And he and his vice president, Mike Pence, who tweeted about Black History Month today, and I put that in quotes, are ignorant to the history of this significance of what today is and this entire month. I'm disgusted, Don.
Wow. Paris, you were in the room. He singled you out. Listen to this.
Paris has done an amazing job in a very hostile CNN community. He's all by himself, and he'll have 7 people in Paris, and I'll take Paris over the 7. But I don't watch CNN, so I don't get to see you as much as I don't like watching fake news.
So Paris, did you feel those comments were appropriate for that occasion?
The comments about me, yes, I thought they were appropriate. My mother thought they were appropriate. No, listen, in all seriousness, I was there for the entire listening session that the president had marking the first day of Black History Month. His comments in totality, both on camera and off camera, were not only appropriate, they were substantive, they were positive, and I was truly impressed by the fact that the president singled out the issue of historically black colleges and universities and wanting to get to the bottom of their plight under the past administration and find positive solutions to make them more solvent and do whatever he can do in his administration to really support them fully. And then he also talked about Chicago. He talked about school choice, and he talked about using the full range of the administration to make America great again for African Americans, people in other fragile communities, and for the entire country. So it was a very positive meeting.
Why does Donald Trump always associate black people with Chicago? I'm just wondering. Please educate me.
I will educate you right now. It was brought up in the meeting about Chicago, and there was talk about some type of a meeting that was going to happen with some members in the community, and he said, if that doesn't work, in which I hope it does, I want you to know that I'm going to send in the feds because this is not going to happen under my watch. He's very concerned about the violence and the crime that's going on in Chicago, but that was not the whole totality of the meeting or listening session. That was just one portion of it that was brought up.
How long was the media in the room? How long were the cameras in the room?
I think the cameras might have been in there for a maximum of 3 to 5 minutes at max.
So then,
for the total hour that we were there with him.
Right. So during the portion that we got to see and the country got to see, he chose to use that time to bash the media, to get things wrong about American history. And Michael, after
what
he
was
met,
wremember about American history?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
After he wasn't president, he was president-elect then. After he met with Kanye West, who, you remember he said George Bush doesn't care about black people. You wrote this in the Washington Post, and I think this was in December. You said, it may be that Mr. Trump's views reveal something just as devastating as not caring for black people, not knowing us. Here's President Trump. Listen.
Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is being recognized more and more, I notice. Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, and millions more black Americans who made America what it is today. Big impact.
So we would have invited Frederick Douglass here, but he died in 1895. That wasn't completely clear from the president's comments, and he got some criticism for that. Does he sound like a kid who hasn't done his homework, Michael?
A kid?
Absolutely. I would think that as a professor at Georgetown University, and I wrote that in the New York Times, it seems to me that I have never seen a president so blatantly and unapologetically unmolested by enlightenment. Here's a man who is not in the least curious about the depth of facts, the sophisticated interpretation of those facts, or placing black history in a broader context that can then be used, I think, to illuminate what he's attempting to do. Look, if Donald Trump were to be serious about that black history, talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and Frederick Douglass, who said what to the Negroes the 4th of July, Martin Luther King Jr., who said that he was sorry to conclude that most Americans were unconscious racists, and Harriet Tubman, who constantly left her safety zone to go back to slavery, to free slaves. If he were to truly associate himself with those figures, he might have to be self-critical about his own particular administration. But the lack of involvement, the lack of curiosity, the lack of knowledge, and the lack of the ability to relate what happened in history to what's going on now bespeaks, I think, a gross ignorance about African-American culture and doesn't bode well for Mr. Trump, President Trump, addressing these issues either through public policy or from using his bully pulpit to illuminate the context of the crises that black people confront.
The whole thing about Frederick Douglass also came up during the White House briefing. Here's Sean Spicer.
Today he made the comment about Frederick Douglass being recognized more and more. Do you have any idea what specifically he was referring to?
Well, I think there's contributions. I think he wants to highlight the contributions that he has made, and I think through a lot of the actions and statements that he's going to make, I think the contributions of Frederick Douglass will become more and more.
I'm not sure I understood. Seriously, I'm not sure I understand what he meant by that.
This is why we need Black History Month, Don. Look, the history started as Negro History Week, and Carter G. Woodson started this. He pioneered this because he believed that basically black history needed to be taught as part of history in the schools so that our kids understood history, and then as it grew, white progressives became more and more interested, and then we all know that under Gerald Ford, Black History Month was finally nationally recognized as a month. Yeah. So we need black history because the press secretary of the White House press secretary doesn't know black history. The president of the United States does not know black history.
Yeah, well, let Paris get in. Paris, go ahead.
Yeah, the only person who was actually in the room to know the totality of what was said, I will tell you what the president was referring to was the African American History Museum that is recently put on the mall, and he was talking about how important that is and visitors going to see that inside of the actual museum. He was talking about more and more people as they go through the museum are learning more and more about Frederick Douglass and the other persons that he named. But to say that this president, I'll just say this, have me on with the same panel in a few months when we see more and more things that this president is going to do for our community, especially HBCUs and education. I think you'll have a seriously different tune because this is a president who cares about our community.
And Donald Trump doesn't have a plan for HBCUs.
We could welcome. Right. We could welcome the attention of the Trump presidency on those critical and serious issues. That does not displace the fact or replace the fact that Donald Trump is not intimately familiar with these things. I'm glad that he's open to that kind of conversation. But as wielding a bully pulpit in the most visible spot in the world, to have that kind of fumbling toward an inchoate conception of what black history is and speaking about Frederick Douglass as if he were in the present, as if he was some guy around the corner who was making contributions now without making that critical distinction, doesn't leave me much confidence in the fact that Donald Trump will be able to tell the past from the present. And indeed, given the tone and the tenor of his presidency, the revival of a certain kind of bigotry does harken back to the times that Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass lived.
Why do you say he's taking it out of context, Paris, when the tape was there? We actually ran it live on CNN.
Well, play the whole tape for your audience to see, and I think it'll speak for itself. I think you're taking out what he said out of context. He was by no means talking as if Frederick Douglass is alive and well today.
He was. I just heard the tape. No. Furthermore, I heard the comments in real time. I was watching in my office.
Well, Symone, congratulations. I was in the room, and I understand what he was saying.
And so there is a difference. Because Donald
well, that's a problem. That's your problem.
But here's the problem.
You should never. You should never turn down an opportunity to have a seat at the table.
Pardon me. I have a
when you
seat.
do not,
I have a
you do
seat.
not
The
have a
problem
seat,
is-
Symone.
the
You
problem
just said
is
if you were
Donald-
given
One
a
at a
seat,
time.
you would
Donald
not
Trump-
go. That's the problem. That was the problem with
Don,
Congressman
the
Lewis
fact is
when
this.
he
One,
said he
I
would
don't
not
need Donald
invite
Trump to
President
give me
Donald Trump
anything,
down to
but two,
Selma.
I do
That's
need
a
Donald
problem.
Trump
You
Start-
want to
make
have
a
a
real
seat at the
effort
table,
All
and
right,
it's important
Paris.
to
with
have
the
a seat at the
African-American
table.
community.
Symone,
I'm
start
taking
your
a page-
comments over, please, because we
The
didn't hear.
problem is, look, I don't need Donald Trump to give me anything. I'm
the
a
president.
27-year-old black woman on CNN. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, Donald Trump needs to be talking about policies and proposals, real policy prescriptions for the
And he
African-American
did.
community. He's only given us rhetoric. He hasn't given us any action. And he cannot govern for the next 4 years like that. What we have seen from Donald Trump is that he has nominated people like Betsy DeVos, who is using charter schools as a carrot stick for black communities. We have seen that he has nominated people
The
like
black community overwhelmingly supports
we
charter
have
schools.
seen that he has nominated people like
Okay.
Jeff Sessions, who doesn't even believe in protecting the civil liberties and civil rights of all people, including black people. So look, Donald Trump is disingenuous, and I'm gonna take a page out of Kanye West's book. Donald Trump doesn't care about black people, and until he shows me otherwise, that's where I am.
Okay, so here's
That's
the.
unfortunate for you and for the listeners to hear that type of remark about the President of the United States, and for her to say that she would not have a seat at the table to try to bring about
Again,
change.
I don't need Donald
That's
Trump to
the
give
problem.
me anything.
Donald Trump won't get
do
you
you
as
know
the President
if-
of the United States.
do you know
and if
if,
President
Can
Obama
I say
invited
this?
me to a table, I would be there in a heartbeat, but he never asked me. But if he
here's
did, I'd
the
be there
problem.
because
Here's the
it's
problem.
important.
Go ahead, Mike.
Brother Paris, here's the problem. Not only did Donald Trump not want to invite President Obama figuratively to a seat at the table, and I think that Solange has made this a very resonant metaphor, but what's interesting here is that this is a man who spent 2 years of his life weighing against the legitimacy and the stability of the American presidency, and specifically denigrating and humiliating the reputation of President Obama, wanting to retroactively abort him from the womb of democracy and to pretend that he was not a human being worthy of significant attribution of intelligence. And you are offended simply because we push back on Donald Trump as a man who was manifestly incapable of intelligently speaking about the African American experience.
If you
Having
had
Ben
pushed-
Carson
if
in the
you
room,
had
and God
pushed-
bless you,
if
you
you
in the
had
room,
pushed back-
I'm saying to you, I didn't interrupt you.
I
Finally, the point
interrupted
is
you.
that Donald Trump, as a man who represents the most antithetical to black intelligence position that one might stake out. And I think at this point, there is not much sympathy for a man who has been grossly inconsistent and viciously uncomprehending and indifferent to the plight and predicament of African American people.
Well, Dr. Dyson, if you had pushed back on President Obama for the past 8 years, as you've done for this president in less than 2
Read
weeks,
my book.
maybe
Read
we
my
would.
book,
Clearly
sir.
don't.
Maybe.
You clearly don't know
Maybe.
Dr. Dyson has been
anything
very
about-
critical of the
Dr.
Obama
Dyson, Dr.
administration.
Dyson has been one of the most critical people of the Obama administration.
Maybe we would have gotten a
I
lot
see
more
there's a
done for
similar
our
tone with the-
community.
what-
Maybe
Well,
the
here's
funding
the
of
point.
HBCUs
One at a
would
time,
have been
Doctor.
more
One at a
significant.
time, Doctor, and then go ahead,
Maybe
Paris.
we would have been able to figure out this issue that's going on in the carnage in Chicago. Maybe
Oh,
we would have
Lord.
been able to
Okay.
do so. Oh, Lord,
Let
it's
me
true.
finish.
Y'all
We
do know
need
black
God,
people
and we
live
need-
other places
let me
other
finish.
than Chicago.
They do, but
But
as of right
here's-
now,
you know what?
the problem is
I
in
think
Chicago that
here's
we
the-
should focus on.
Here's
and I'm
what's
glad
clear.
that the president
There's
is doing that.
There's an elective affinity between the black people who are attracted to Trump and Mr. Trump himself. The inability to read critically, to be in contact with the information that is readily available, and not to be able to be literate about the context and sophisticated, nuanced interpretations of the facts. The fact is, I wrote a book called The Black Presidency, Barack Obama and the Politics of Race in America, where I appreciated his genius, but I also pushed back upon the failures of that presidency to address significant and serious issues, including the issue of race within context. So if you are conversant with that literature, you wouldn't make the kind of ignorant statement you just made about the particular position I've stated.
And Dr. Dyson, I was watching you today as you were on The View with the ladies, barely getting a word in edgewise. That's a show, and that's why we love it. You talked about the reason you believe that this president was elected, and you also said that you believe that the former president did not do enough about race, while you appreciated his genius in some ways, what you call it, and I'm paraphrasing here. But also you talked about the reasons you think that Donald Trump will be bad for race as president.
Absolutely right. Because you see, Donald Trump, as I said then, and thank you, Don, for that, is that, you know, Frankenstein is the name of the doctor, not the monster. So there was a groundswell that produced Donald Trump. Donald Trump's renunciation of the ability to be empathetic toward black people, to understand that the most significant and most powerful black man on the face of the earth, Barack Obama, was worthy of the kind of respect. And many black people understood if he's not respectful of this man, he's not respectful of black people in general. But beyond that, he was elected because there was a groundswell of resentment against a black man in charge. And the fact is, if white America can't love and respect and appreciate Barack Obama, there's not a black man who's been created that they will ever be attracted to. He is as affable and genial a man as one might imagine, and yet still, despite the fact that he was very low-toned in his dealings with white America, he failed to tell white America the truth and to hold them accountable for some of the vicious consequences of the legacies of inequality that presented themselves. I didn't expect him to be Rafiki Wakuumba, speak Swahili, and stand up and use a black power sign. What I expected him to do is to deploy the bully pulpit to be as truthful to white folk as he was to black folk when he cast aspersions against us. That's
Paris,
the kind of balance we were looking for.
Paris, what would you say, I mean, because you have the president's ear, you're, I would imagine, part of his council now, you were invited into the room. What do you say to him? Do you offer him your honest advice? Do you tell him sometimes that he's tone deaf and that he may to, like Steve Bannon said, maybe he should listen a little bit instead of doing all the talking?
Well, the title of this meeting was a listening session, and so that's exactly what he was doing. That's what he's done multiple times throughout the campaign. But what I told him today specifically, Don, was I said, Mr. President, you have the opportunity to go down as one of the greatest presidents of the United States, especially as it relates to the African American community and other and fragile communities across the country. There are things that you can do right now if you get it right from day one. Speaking of pre-K to K, pre-K to 12th grade and the school choice, the parental choice, and getting that issue right on public education, I said you can be a hero to a huge swath of America if you support historically black colleges and universities and the programs that support it, such as Pell Grants, such as Parent Plus loan issues, and other things.
Do you think it would help if he understood the history of black America?
I think that the president does understand the history of black America, and the reason why he has listening sessions is for him to understand greater about the totality of the American experience from a whole cross-section of people, which includes the African American community, because he's not just the president, like we always used to say about President Obama, just the president for black people, he's the president of all Americans. And this is a unique time for him to get it right. Stay tuned, because this president is going to do significant things this month and throughout his presidency for our community. This panel just doesn't want to hear it.
I've got to go. Symone, I'll give you the last word.
Look, Donald Trump had a listening session today with his staff and his campaign. Donald Trump had a listening session today with his staff and his campaign volunteers.
That's not
true. We need real engagement and surrogates. We need real engagement. We need a real plan. And again, I will extend Donald Trump the same courtesy he has extended women, people of color in this country, black people, Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, the disabled community. He has yet to show up, so I am not showing up for him.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that.
Thanks,
we'll be right back with more of our breaking news tonight.